Today I'm going to be unboxing and giving you my first impressions of the brand new iPad 10. Now on the surface, this looks like a pretty compelling iPad, featuring the more modern design with rounded display, USB-C, and also adds a new landscape camera. But as someone who uses the iPad Air 5, I can't help but wonder why Apple didn't just upgrade the iPad Air and instead opted to create a whole new model, as the differences between the iPad 10 and the iPad Air 5 are small but also quite big. Let me tell you more as we unbox and check out the iPad 10. As always, I will leave all the purchase links down in the description. But first, I am doing a giveaway on this brand new iPhone 14 in this beautiful blue color. If you want a chance to win, be sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment your favorite feature of the new iPad 10, along with your Instagram username, and then follow me on Instagram, where I will announce the winner on November the 27th. Alright, so here we go. This is the iPad 10. Now, in terms of price, this comes in at $449 or £499 for 64 gigabytes, which is up compared to the $329 for the previous iPad 9, which Apple does still sell. Now we also do get some bright new colors. So in this case, we have the silver model, which is the one that I have here today. And we also have blue, pink, and yellow. And yes, you can also buy this in a cellular model if you would like. So let's go ahead and lift off the top of the box here. It is kind of struggling. There we go. And this reveals the iPad itself. Now I'm actually kind of curious to see the color, as I haven't had a silver iPad for a long time. As you guys may know, I have a space gray iPad, iPad Air 5 at the moment. So here we go. Oh, that looks good. You know, the silver color, it may not be the most unique color in the world, but it certainly does always look good. And I would definitely consider this to be timeless. This will actually perfectly match my M1 Pro, MacBook Pro, which I also have in silver. So from a design perspective, right off the bat, it looks very similar to the previous iPad, or well, the iPad Air. I mean, not the previous, the iPad 9 of course has that older design, but right away I can actually see that the bezels are a little bit thicker. We do have that camera now, which is now in the horizontal position as opposed to vertical on all other iPads. But before we take a closer look at the iPad itself, let's see what else we get in the box here. So here we have the Designed by Apple in California packet. So let's see what we got inside. There we go. So we just have Apple stickers and your user guide, which is just a simple 2-page pamphlet, and of course your warranty information. And then thankfully we do still have a charger included, and what does appear to be a braided USB-C to USB-C cable. It is great to see Apple introducing more USB-C to their products, whether it's out of their own will or legally requiring them to do so, as will soon be happening with the iPhone as well, which is so great to see. But here we go. USB-C on the iPad is really big, and it's also a big upgrade compared to the previous iPad 9. And then in terms of the power brick, we have the standard 20-watt power adapter included, which is fast enough, I would say. Nice and portable, kind of strikes the right balance between having a brick that is light and in this case very easy to take with you, but still charging at a reasonable pace. All right, so with that, let's put off the box to the side here and let's take a closer look at the iPad here, boot it up, and see exactly what is new. Now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we do have that new design, which isn't really new, but new to this line of iPad, as this comes from the iPad Air and iPad Pro. So you can see we have this more squared off look, which is a lot more comfortable in the hand and just looks more modern. Now, we of course also get Touch ID now on the top of the iPad, right there in the sleep wake button. And on top of that, we also have stereo speakers. So we have stereo ports on the top as well as on the bottom. Now this will have 2 speakers instead of 4 that you will find on the iPad Pro, but this should still be an upgrade over the previous iPad 9. And now in terms of the display, we have a 10.9-inch display. Now I did mention earlier that the bezels are going to be slightly thicker compared to the Air and the Pro, but still this is a massive upgrade over what we had before with the home button design on the bottom, and I also really like the rounded corners on the display. One thing that I do notice immediately looking at the display is that the iPad 10 does not have a laminated display like the iPad Air and iPad Pro does, and what that means is that the display isn't isn't as closely, laminated to the front glass panel. And in fact, there is a little bit of a gap in between. I'll do my best to capture this on camera, but I can tell you, seeing this in person, it definitely shows. And the screen also appears to be quite a bit more reflective compared to the Air, as it doesn't have that anti-reflective coating. So as you can see, with the lower price of the now iPad 10, you win some and of course you lose some, as opposed to the more expensive iPad Air. And then according to Apple's website, it is also just about 10% thicker, which is hard to notice in the hand, although usually I do use my iPad with a smart folio, but it is still razor thin, as you can see, and will also retain that all-day battery. That is, of course, one of the great things about the iPad is that incredible battery life. And then now, of course, we also have USB-C on the bottom, which doesn't just mean you can charge it with all your other chargers that you probably already have laying around, but you can also plug in things like external hard drives and other accessories much more easily. All in all, I vastly prefer this more modern design, and really great to see it now come to the entry-level iPad as well. And one of the cool things about the iPad 10 specifically is that it moves the camera from the top center of the display in portrait mode to, well, I guess off to the right middle side, which will be the top middle if you're using the iPad in landscape, which I would say I use my iPad in landscape mode 95% of the time. So this just makes more sense, especially in Zoom calls and video calls. Instead of looking off to the side as you normally would if, say, your iPad is in landscape and the camera were here or here, in this case, you'll be looking right at the camera, and this will look much better. And then inside the iPad, we get the A14 Bionic chip. Now, this is the same processor as from the older iPhone 12. Now, this should still have a good 3 to 4 years of software support left, and should definitely still run well today. Of course, I would have preferred to see the M1 chip, which is, of course, Apple's newer desktop class chip, as found in the iPad Air. And then speaking of comparing the iPad 10 to the iPad Air, I'm just not sure if both need to exist. I honestly would have found it better if Apple had instead just updated the iPad Air, as on the iPad Air for $150 more, you get that vastly superior M1 chip compared to the A14, and you also get second generation Apple Pencil support, as the iPad 10 strangely only supports the first generation Apple Pencil. And then it would have also been great to see this new camera orientation brought to the other iPads as well, the Air as well as the Pro. Another thing that stood out to me with this year's iPad release is that overnight in much of the world, Apple actually increased the price of the iPad Air. To give you an example, here in the UK, it went from £569 to £669. Now, this is something I'm really not fond of, as no new features were brought to the iPad Air, just a big increase in price, which I don't know about you, but I don't call that a feature. Again, this is why I personally would have preferred it if Apple had just added that new landscape camera to the iPad Air and made it a little bit cheaper, somewhere priced between the iPad 10 and the current iPad Air 5. But that's how I see it. But if we take a step back and look at the iPad line as a whole, the iPad 10 is still a good option. But if you have the cash, I do suggest going up to the iPad Air instead for two key reasons. And the first is that the iPad Air has that vastly more powerful M1 chip, which will also last for many more years than the A14 chip that we get in this iPad. Again, I would estimate anywhere from 3 to 4 years of software support on the iPad 10, where the M1 iPad Air could get anywhere from 5 to 6. And another reason is that the iPad 10 doesn't have a laminated display, so already just from holding it in my hands here in the studio, I can see that it reflects the studio lights that I have overhead much more so than any other iPad, especially than my iPad Air. And secondly, I can see a noticeable gap between the glass front panel and the display that sits underneath. Now, on its own, this isn't a deal breaker, but I would have liked it if Apple had just added the same laminated display on this iPad as from the iPad Air. And then if you want a more budget-oriented iPad, Apple does still sell the iPad 9, which does feature that older design with the home button on the front and the thicker bezels on the top and the bottom, but coming in at $329, it is hard to beat from a budget perspective. But anyway guys, these are all my impressions on the iPad 10, not my final thoughts. I will still thoroughly test this product here, and be sure to stay tuned for my full review in which I'll give you my full conclusions and thoughts on the new iPad 10. Let me know, by the way, if you have any questions or comparisons that you'd like me to do with the iPad 10, whether it be to the iPad Air 5 or to the new iPad Pro 4. By the way, if you haven't seen it yet, I have also just unboxed the iPad Pro 4 with the M2, so I highly recommend checking that out, as well as my iPad Air 5 review. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.